6 million years ago, there was no such thing as human. There was only a small, frightened creature standing at the edge of a forest that was dying around it, watching the trees thin out, watching the grasslands creep in, watching every certainty it had ever known begin to disappear. It did not know it was standing at the beginning of the longest survival story ever told. It did not know that its descendants would outlast ice ages, outlast supervolcanoes, outlast 100 other species that seemed, by every reasonable measure, better equipped to live. It only knew one thing: today it had to eat. Today it had to avoid becoming something else's meal. Today it had to survive until nightfall. This is the story of how that happened, not once, but across 3 million years, 1,000 generations, and a dozen different species of human that walked the earth before ours. This is the story of how the weak became the dangerous, how the slow became the clever, how a creature with no claws, no fangs, and no fur thick enough to survive a single winter alone became the only animal on earth that could conquer every corner of it. This is life millions of years ago. 10 million years ago, Africa was a different planet. Dense, unbroken rainforests stretched across much of the continent, and in its canopy lived the ancestors of every great ape alive today, gorillas, chimpanzees, and a lineage that had not yet split into anything we would recognize as human. Life in the canopy was, in evolutionary terms, easy. Food hung within arm's reach. Predators struggled to climb the thinnest branches. The trees offered shelter, escape, and abundance all at once. But the planet was changing beneath them. Tectonic shifts were pulling East Africa apart, carving out what we now call the Great Rift Valley. As the land buckled and rose, it choked off the rain that once fed the forests to the east. Slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, the unbroken canopy began to fracture. Trees thinned, gaps opened between them, and in those gaps, grass began to grow. For a forest-dwelling primate, this was catastrophe in slow motion. The safety of continuous canopy, where you could move for miles without ever touching the ground, was disappearing. What remained were islands of trees separated by open, exposed savanna. To reach food, to reach other trees, to reach safety, something had to change. We tend to imagine the moment an ancestor first stood upright as a triumphant scene, a creature rising toward the sun, taking its first step toward humanity. The reality was far less noble. Standing upright on two legs, called bipedalism, is not obviously a good idea for a small primate. It is slower than running on 4 limbs. It exposes the entire front of the body to predators. It requires a complete re-engineering of the hips, spine, and feet, changes that took hundreds of thousands of years and left early walkers clumsy, vulnerable, and awkward both in the trees and on the ground. So why did it happen at all? The leading explanation is brutally practical: energy. Walking upright uses significantly less energy than the quadrupedal knuckle walking of chimpanzees and gorillas when covering long, flat distances. And as the forest fragmented, long, flat distances were exactly what these creatures now had to cross, moving from one shrinking patch of trees to the next in search of food. A creature that could cover that ground burning less energy had a better chance of surviving the journey. A creature that could also stand tall enough to see over tall grass, spotting a stalking predator a few seconds sooner, had an even better one. Bipedalism, in other words, was not a leap forward. It was a narrow escape hatch, and only the creatures that used it survived to pass on the trait. By roughly 4 million years ago, a genus called Australopithecus had fully committed to this new way of moving. The most famous individual in this group has a name of her own. Paleontologists nicknamed her skeleton Lucy, discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. Standing just over 3 feet tall, Lucy walked upright, but her curved fingers and long arms tell us she still climbed trees regularly, likely sleeping in them each night, where the ground remained a death trap after dark. To understand the pressure these early hominins lived under, you have to understand their place in the food chain, and it was not near the top. Fossil sites from this era are scattered with hominin bones bearing unmistakable puncture marks from the teeth of leopards, saber-toothed cats, and giant hyenas. One particularly haunting piece of evidence: a fossilized Australopithecus skull with 2 puncture holes spaced exactly the width of a leopard's lower canines, found lodged in the bone itself. These were not apex predators fighting for dominance. These were small, slow, exposed animals, hunted actively by nearly everything larger than themselves. Survival meant constant vigilance. It meant traveling in groups, since a lone individual on open ground was as good as dead. It meant staying close to trees whenever possible, using them as vertical refuge the moment danger appeared. It meant timing movement carefully, avoiding the hours when big cats were most active, clustering activity around dawn and dusk when visibility favored the prey over the predator. Every single day was an exercise in threat assessment. Where is the water source, and what might be waiting near it? Which direction is the wind blowing, and can something smell us before we see it? How far is the nearest tree, and could we reach it in time?